Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining another episode of the Educational Leadership Podcast. We have another very special guest, and before we introduce our guest, I want to give a shout out to our co-host, Corinne French.
Hello, so glad to be here today. Can't wait to get started.
Yeah, super excited. And before we start today's discussion and conversation around the great things happening in public education, we do want to give a shout out to our sponsor, Ideal Impact. Ideal Impact's given hundreds of millions of dollars to public ed around the great state of Texas, and now expanding nationally as well. Over 200 or close to 200 school districts in Texas are working with them. So if you want recurring revenue, zero out of pocket to your district, unrestricted funds for your district, reach out to Ideal Impact. Okay, for today's guest, we have Superintendent Bonewald out of Wimberley ISD. Superintendent Bonewald, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Gary and Corinne. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Yes, we're super excited. I personally love the Wimberley. I used to live out in Canyon Lake, not too far from there. And so I still consider that home, even though I'm back in Houston. But so anyways, I'm super excited about you being from Wimberley as well, for what it's worth. So tell us a little bit about your background, like, how you got started in public education and how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, well, I would say that public education's in the blood for me. I'm a third generation Texas public educator. I have a grandmother who retired as a first grade teacher, was actually a teacher in my district, and one of the people who was responsible for teaching me to read. My father is a retired athletic director and here in the state of Texas. And so I grew up kind of watching him and his role and learning how to build relationships and interact through the challenging role that is a head football coach in the state of Texas. So that was great training ground, and it was very impactful. I have one brother, and we both entered public education as teachers and coaches initially. So I've got a strong background in public education that runs deep in my family.
Sounds like it. Wow.
Third generation. I mean, that's impressive. And you hinted, and I think there's a little bit of a laugh about the football coach and the relationships that you need to make. I imagine being the son of an athletic director definitely was a window into leadership that you maybe not all students are privy to. Did your parents, do you feel like they encouraged you to go into education, or do you feel like they were like, come on, there's other things for you?
Oh, I don't have to guess at all. My dad was elated that I was interested in going that direction. My mom told me when I went off to college, you can do anything you want except be a coach. So she had seen the challenges of small town America and small town Texas. And, in a superintendent job, you make complex decisions, and it's impossible to make everybody happy with every decision. And even more so when you're the football coach on a Friday night calling a play, I think.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I imagine with three generations of public ed, that's what you said, right? 3 generations.
That's right.
And wow, just that much experience just growing up and being around that. And then now, as a superintendent, what are you passionate about? There's a lot going on in public ed. What are you passionate about right now?
I'm passionate about a lot of things, some specific to public ed and then some specific to Wimberley ISD and what we've got going on here. Just starting out broadly, what I'm really passionate about is us telling our story in public ed. Here in Wimberley, we're making strides to help our public understand what's actually happening in our schools, and not just telling it through the words of the superintendent, not just telling it through the words of the director of communication, but starring the voice of our students, utilizing the voice of our staff, our teachers, to help tell the story about the wonderful things that are actually happening in public ed. So I think that's a real driving passion of mine right now. And we're just in the early stages. We have by no means perfected that, but that is an area that we've identified as an important focus for us. And so I've just finished my first year as superintendent. You don't come into a new role and a new job that's as complex as this one without first getting your feet settled on the ground and trying to understand the landscape and build relationships and things of that nature. I've been super blessed here in Wimberley to have a very supportive school board, a very supportive community. And so I think we've laid the groundwork now to really begin to effectively tell our story, both here locally and more broadly.
Absolutely. Yeah. So that's beautiful. I mean, I think that's a wonderful way to connect, with not only your community, but, people abroad on what's, the good things that are happening. Right. So, if we can, let's peel the onion back and expand on that a little bit. So tell us, what's happening out there at Wimberley. Like, what are some of the cool things, and, maybe a story or two that's happening out.
Yeah, there's some really cool things happening right now around community partnership. I think that one of the things that I especially appreciate about this community here is that the school district isn't seen as a separate entity or a silo. You do this and we do our thing. It really is a community that looks to find ways to be mutually beneficial to one another. So one example of that is we are in the process of partnering with our Wimberley Youth Sports Association, known as WISA, and our county, we're in Hayes County. And so we have basically a three-party partnership where the county is providing approximately $4 million to our local Wimberley Youth Sports Association to build some fields for our youth. The reality is that we're in this Central Texas hotbed that is seeing significant population growth. And in our community, as wonderful as it is, some of the infrastructure to support our students just isn't in place. And land comes at a premium here in our school district. It's very expensive land here in the Hill Country, as you might be aware. And so we have some land that is on our newest primary school. We have a pre-K through 2 school that opened actually during COVID. And so we are partnering with these other 2 entities. The county's putting forward the capital to build these fields. We are providing the land through a long-term lease to the Youth Sports Association, and they are going to be responsible for the construction of the fields and then operating those to offer the many youth sports that we do. I think we've seen like a 200% growth in youth participation over the last 5 to 10 years here in our school district. And it's going to be just adjacent to our youngest elementary students who are the participants in these activities. And so our school is going to benefit in that we will also have these fields available to use during the day for our own activities with our kids. So it's really a win-win-win partnership for our community.
That makes me think of when people are going to partner outside of a school district with a community. I think there can be some hesitations and some fears and maybe even just like caution, like, well, this happened last time we did it, or this is what happened. How do you battle that, or how do you confront that? And maybe it was an easy transition. So thinking of maybe boards and districts where they might be afraid of those partnerships, like what kind of best practices do you have, or tips or suggestions or anything related to that, knowing that there could be some hesitation?
Yeah, it's a great question. I do think on the front end, we really benefit from the fact that this community has had effective partnership opportunities in the past. So there's this baseline of some positive experience that exists there. But more broadly, I think that this is not something that's just kind of been thrown upon people and surprise, here we're doing this. It's been methodical. It's been very transparent about what the process is, about what the responsibilities of each party are. And it's also really helpful when the need is so obvious. It's a clear benefit to the youngest people in our community when we know we don't really have appropriate, ample space for them to engage in activities that are helpful to their development.
Yeah, need. I mean, that's the need. And then I guess I'm also hearing like the baseline of good experiences is helpful, but at some point, if there is fear, you have to let that need shine brighter than the fear of doing something with a partnership. So I love that. Thank you for sharing that.
And I would share that there's momentum in that too. We just had our monthly board meeting Monday night, and the district purchased a tract of land at this elementary site a few years ago before it was built, with the understanding that the goal was to create some community partnership with a portion of that land. And so the next conversation that we're having beyond these youth sports fields is with our local fire department. Wimberley experienced a very traumatic situation, a terrible weather situation back in 2015 with a flood that you may have read or heard about previously. But our community is one that we don't get the rain that we want, but when we get it, sometimes it comes in larger doses than we can handle in the short term, and it cuts off portions of our community. And so we're next looking at a partnership with our local fire department to expand a second fire station that would allow them to service our community in those emergency situations on both sides of the community where we get cut off by our rivers. And so think about this, we're focused more than ever, as we should be, on safety and security around our campuses. To have a local fire department who has a manned station 24 hours a day next to one of your largest investments, first responders literally right next door to your youngest students, the opportunity to partner to train future firefighters. Several of the people in our department are Wimberley graduates in the last decade. So there's just another opportunity for collaboration that simply makes sense, both for the school district and for our community.
Gary used the word beautiful earlier. I'm going to use it again. I mean, when you said partner with the fire station with your youngest population and the students, I'm like, I'm just seeing this beautiful picture. My dad was a fireman and I loved going to the fire station and how safe I felt at the fire station, and safety is so important. And I really think it's important that people understand the conversation that you have with what your district needs is so different than other people's districts. And that's why the importance of local control, in my opinion, is so vital. You need to be able to have those conversations and make those decisions for your district, thinking ahead, that are going to be different than mine and different than Gary's. So it sounds like you truly have done a beautiful job thinking ahead. And I love the word momentum that you used a minute ago. It sounds like it's a wonderful district. What are some of the things on the horizon that you're concerned about? Is there something you want to share with our listeners and that you're a little bit concerned about?
We are getting ready to start a new school year. So the first thing that comes to mind is, of course, just the resources being allocated to public education to accomplish the important missions that we intend to accomplish. We're struggling right now, as many other school districts are, to attract and retain staff. For us, particularly in our lower wage earning positions. We are facing a deficit budget, just like so many school districts are, and yet at the same time feeling the pressure, and rightfully so, to need to compensate our employees, particularly our lowest earning employees, to a level that we haven't previously, so we can provide them a living wage, so that we can sleep at night knowing we're doing the best we can to provide for every one of our employees. And so we're taking those steps, but it's stressful. The reality is that it's stressful for everybody involved, from the people who are struggling with those real financial needs to the people trying to balance what do we do and what can we do with what we have. So I feel like that's probably the greatest or top of mind pressure that I'm probably not the only superintendent feeling right now.
No. Sadly, no.
I really like the mindset behind the whole discussing right now. And it seems like there's more than two, but there's been definitely two that I've noticed. One is districts almost becoming more closed off, as some of the difficult conversations are being held and that sort of thing, where they just, they're becoming more reserved, if you will. And then you have other districts that are making connections, right, and forming these types of partnerships. So I can really appreciate the building of bridges with the community and strengthening those bonds and the trust factor and everything involved in that, and the transparency as well. It's just, I think that's a really great mindset for laying that foundation for things of the future, whether that be innovation or whatever it may be, new ideas that come up from the board or from the district and the teachers and that sort of thing, or the community. So that's very cool.
And I think we're really embracing that, and building that trust, which is, it's critical, Gary and Corinne. I mean, we can't accomplish anything without that trust, both internally in our organization and with our community. And part of the steps to accomplishing that are being really radically transparent about the things that aren't going well too. Whether that's a program, whether that's a bad decision we made, and then sharing, what we plan to do to try to address those things. We, for the first time ever, did a survey at the end of the year of our students, a separate survey of our staff, a separate survey of our parents, and a separate survey of any just community members at large that wanted to give us feedback. And we've been reporting out those results, the good and the bad, at our monthly board meetings as a part of our strategic plan. And, it's for me, it's a compliment to our board, because sometimes that feedback's even critical of the board, and they're embracing that. Ironically, this past Monday, we looked at our students' feedback. And so to see your students identifying challenges that they are creating, they're answering the question. One of their greatest concerns is how they and their peers are treating adults in terms of respect. And that's the students saying that they need to do better. How powerful is that?
Oh.
Yeah.
I want to commend you on that. I think people who are outside of public ed don't understand that you don't have to do that extra survey. The state provides all kinds of surveys and all kinds of to receive different grants and different funding that you receive from the state. You have all kinds of communication that you have to have with your stakeholders. But to do something at that level is it's beautiful, and I commend you, because I think we did our district, where I was on the board for a long time, we just did a survey like that last year, and it asked critical questions of board, like, how do you feel about your board? Do you trust the board? Do you trust the board's decisions? Whatever. And the thing is, if you don't know the answer to that, you can't make improvements. You're just guessing, and we're assuming. And I think I just commend you again and your board for taking that extra step and doing that, and your administration team. I know that puts it's an extra step that you didn't have to do. And I want our listeners to know that the districts that do that and the superintendents that do that should be recognized, because you didn't have to do that. So good job.
Well, thank you, but there's really true value from it. I mean, it's a core part of what we're doing to both celebrate where we're doing well and help identify the areas that we need to focus on. Now, I want to draw upon something that you've both mentioned a little bit here in our conversation, and that's around local decision-making, making things fit your community. And the reality is, with over 1,000 school districts, some of us are similar, but we're all at different places and at different points in time. And one of the things that I'm really excited about that's happening in our district is how we're taking things that we're responsible to do, but making them localized, making them fit the culture and the community that we have. And one specific example I would share with you is, in the last 2 to 3 years, we've had sort of, these certain hot button terms that have been taken and made to mean different things. And one of them might be around the concept of social emotional learning or character education. And I really love how this community and this school district have embraced that. And it started before my arrival here, in terms of recognizing there are some core bedrock principles that we want our students to know. And we're going to use a language that our community that resonates with our community. And so, Senate Bill 123 was passed, and not this session, but the prior one, and required character education. Our group, through our Director of Student Services and our counselors and teacher leaders, developed our own character education curriculum, and we call it Texan Roots, because we're the Wimberley Texans. And so each one of those letters in Texan means something. Each one of those letters has activities and vocabulary that we're working to build pre-K through 12, so that we're really building a culture of what it means to be a Wimberley Texan and what kind of character we're trying to grow in our kids.
Oh, I can't wait to go look that up. I mean, I keep saying the word beautiful, but the fact that you're able to come in and enjoy some of the things that they've done and add your professionalism and your touch to it, it's inspiring. Our podcasts are always inspiring to me. I know we're going to be running short on time, and Gary probably has the final question. But I want to just make sure I thank you for what you're doing, and wish you the absolute best in this next year with your students and your staff and your board. And I'll let Gary ask the final question.
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to say I really appreciate today's conversation, because those community partnerships mean a lot to me. I've come from the business side of things. Corinne's come from the public ed side of things, which I think our discussions we have on the podcast are unique. But coming from the business side of things, I can appreciate the partnerships with the community, because at the end of the day, the students, they're preparing to go out into the world, and they may go work for a company or start their own company, or so I can appreciate those partnerships there, and I can see where the local control aspect of it comes in as well, because I've seen it with big organizations, big corporations, and obviously the government is kind of a big company. And anytime you get a lot of bureaucracy, sometimes the decision making at the very top doesn't really reflect on what's happening at the local level. And so I can appreciate that decision making, and it probably affects how the community perceives things as well, because if they think all districts are the same, they may think one thing, good or bad. But if there's local decisions being made, there's an opportunity for districts to shine and really tailor things to local communities. So that's just so cool that you have that focus there. Okay, well, I'll get off my soapbox now, and I'll ask the last question. This is a difficult one. Okay, so if you were to have someone else in public ed come on the podcast and share their story, who would you recommend? Who's made an impact in your life?
I'm gonna I did my homework, Gary, and I listened to a few of your prior podcasts. So I got to think about this a little bit, and I'm gonna go a little off. It's not gonna be it's not gonna be a former superintendent who was a great mentor to me, and I've had some wonderful ones. I'm gonna stay local with this and the theme that we've talked about. In my intro, I didn't share with you that early in my career, I came to Wimberley as a science teacher and coach, and I grew up in this district as a campus administrator, a high school principal, and then left for a while to Victoria ISD for some central office opportunities. And so this past year, I've gotten to come back to the district that I had previously grown up in for 14 years. But if we go back to the early 2000s, as a young science teacher, I had a science department head by the name of Marilyn Van Hooser. She was a longtime teacher here in our district. And within that science department, she was an amazing leader. Today in Wimberley ISD, 22 years later, the current superintendent is one of the teachers who worked within that department. That's me. The current assistant superintendent, of which I have one, is another science teacher who was a young science teacher in that department that Miss Van Hooser led. And our high school principal was a third science teacher in that department. So we know we talk a lot about leadership development and pipelines, and we talk about the fact that everyone's a leader in some way, shape, or form. As I peruse the list of folks that you've gotten a chance to talk to across public ed, and they're very impressive, I thought, at some point that teacher voice and that voice of teacher leaders is another one that we need to continue to find a way to expand. So that would be my person to share with you.
That made my day. I already have a cold, and I'm already now I'm crying, really real tears. Beautiful. You're a handsome man, but this conversation has been so beautiful. I have to make sure our guests were listening. When you're listening on our podcast, you're just hearing voices. But when you're seeing this, there's a beauty that's coming from what you do at your district. And I'm impressed, and I cannot wait to meet Marilyn.
Yeah, I second that. That would be so cool to have her on the podcast. I mean, that's very impressive within the department, just the amount of leadership, and you see things like that, on very rare occasions, whether that be a district or a college or a business or whatever it may be, like sometimes you just have this team, that just does great things because of that leader involved. And and especially being a teacher, I think we can all think back to a teacher that had an impact in our lives. And so she was actually an instructor as well, right? Or was she?
Yeah, she was a fellow teacher, but she was the leader of our department.
Yep,
I'm on it.
absolutely. Okay.
I can't wait to look her up, and I'll email her, and you'll give her a heads up that I will be reaching out to her. This is delightful. Thank you so much.
Oh, it's been a great opportunity to visit with you guys. I am very fortunate to be in a wonderful, special place with a special district and community, and appreciate you giving us a platform to share some of those things today.
Absolutely.
Yes, thank you. These discussions are always so, I don't know what the right word is, transformative, or maybe that's a word. When you come into these discussions, you're kind of in a certain place, but when you leave, just these stories that are shared and the discussions that happen, and just you kind of leave the podcast, and hopefully those listening in kind of feel the same way. When you get to the end of the podcast, you kind of you're in a different place than when you first started listening. So before we close out, just want to thank you again, Superintendent Bonewald and Corinne, for being on the podcast and for today's discussion. And we do want to give a shout out to our sponsor one last time. Ideal Impact's given hundreds of millions of dollars to public ed around the great state of Texas. Nearly 200 districts in Texas, unrestricted funds. Some districts are using it for higher teacher salaries, whatever the district may need, and its recurring revenue happens every year. So if you're looking at exploring creative options for more funding that doesn't involve the government, reach out to Ideal Impact. And for those of you all that have been tuning in, stay tuned for future episodes of the Educational Leadership Podcast.